Hey, so I am back with a book review. I've really been very intentional on getting back into reading, which I absolutely love. And I started with the new book from acclaimed author Tayari Jones called Kin. And in this book, it follows the story of two motherless girls, like they grow up together from infancy. And their names are Vernice and Annie, Annie K, and they are from a real small rural town in Louisiana called Honeysuckle. And it really tells the relationship that they have with one another and how kin a lot of times is not just the family that you're born into, it's the family that you choose, the family that you actually grow to love, and in a lot of ways the family that actually is your family. And they have such a beautiful love story, and not in a romantic way. Like they have such a deep, profound love for one another, and it truly carries them throughout their life because they're both motherless. And when reading this story, you especially it's really about black motherhood, and you really understand that there's so many mother wounds within black women a lot of times, just through systemic racism, systemic sexism, and just throughout time. And they both have lost their mothers in different ways. Vernice loses her mom through murder. Her father kills her mama when she's an infant, and she ends up being raised by her aunt. Annie is different, whereas her mama left her with her grandma. And being that they're both motherless, but they became motherless in different ways, really shapes the trajectory of the rest of their lives and how their relationship twists and turns and just grows between them and also them individually. I would say that Vernice, her mama being dead, really brings a sense of finality to her life and her relationship with her mother, and the longing for her mama. Like she longs for her mama. There's times where she feels like she sees her mama in a vision or as a spirit, but she knows that her mother is dead, and she only has one picture of her mama when in her wedding dress. Whereas Annie K, her mama is still alive, but she doesn't know where her mama is at. So she really goes through her life chasing and looking for her mama, to the point where she ends up sacrificing other relationships. Like she sacrifices her relationship with Bobo, who was her boyfriend, and also it puts strain on the relationship with friends that she garners along the way, Clyde and Baby Doll. And even though Baby Doll has a contentious relationship with her mama, they're still coming from a space that you understand their frustration with Annie K, because it gets to the point like any woman, she's working at this bar, and she learns that her mama, throughout her life she's heard people say negative things about her mama, about her being trifling and things like that, and she is really on a trek to find this woman. So she goes to Memphis, she leaves home, she doesn't tell Vernice, and Vernice thinks that she died or something, because she's like, Annie just left and she would have told me, but Annie's not dead. um and so what she just goes on this trek where she's pretty much has gotten into with these other people, not in a bad way, but they end up trying to make it out of Louisiana, end up in Mississippi, their car break down, they get in touch with this woman running a hoe house. And this woman, she was very insightful, but also I would say callous in a way. I think a lot of women at that time just weren't allowed softness and weren't even allowed to truly see themselves and handle themselves and other women in a caring way. But she does take a liking to Annie, and she tells Annie, don't ever come back here, because people who come back here, it ain't for nothing good. And they have this little thing that they do, not necessarily with Lullabelle, but it's a, I would say, a spiritual tradition where if you want somebody to come back, you'll put dirt from wherever they are for them to come back. And that really shows up in the end of the book. And it shows up in a heartbreaking way, but in a very real way, and almost kind of like a full circle way in a sense. Vernice, because she has this finality of not having her mama, she's able to move on in life in different ways, but she's still looking for a mama as well. She ends up at Spelman. Her aunt is able to put her through school, and she ends up meeting another woman named Joette. And I also liked in this book how it also explored sexuality and sexuality for Black women, even during this time. I believe this is like during the 50s, where even then we can see that, and it was very realistic that we can see that, sexuality was something that even women struggled with back then. And we also see it in the character of Mrs. Ola May and Miss Jemison, who are like the doulas of their community, and it's like understood that they're together but nobody speaks on it. And she has this relationship with Joette, and Joette is, she comes from money, so she walks around like, she not like she owns shit, but she doesn't have to be on her best behavior. Whereas Vernice, she is very appreciative for these new opportunities, so she's on her best behavior. She's much more inclined to fall in line with the social norms, and she's telling Annie about it. But when they're writing each other letters, she's like, I have this boyfriend who I'm crazy about, and I have another boyfriend who is really good for me, who I also love as well, who ends up becoming her husband, Franklin. He's a lawyer and he comes from a well-to-do family, but he suffered from polio, so he kind of has an ailment to him. His mama, Mrs. McHenry, really takes Vernice in. And I think she sees a lot of herself in Vernice, them both coming from humble beginnings. And so she, I think, in a way, is trying to take Vernice under her wing, but she also sees Vernice as this motherless child. And it's kind of a way to become Vernice's mama, literally, because after she marries Franklin, his mama is like, once you get married to my son, I want you to call me mother. And she does call Vernice, she does call Miss McHenry mother. And that's so interesting because we learn early on in the book that Vernice's first words were mother. She didn't talk for a long time, like well into her toddler years. And when she said her first word, it was mother, considering that her mother was already murdered and she was dead and gone by that time. Um, and she goes through her sexuality trying to figure it out, but because she feels as if, she needs to get married, and she still tells Joette the same thing, but Joette, in her mind, in a perfect world, her and Vernice will be together. They will move to DC and be able to be, a lesbian couple at that time. And that was unprecedented. But just to know that even at that time, there were small pockets and communities that were a little bit safe for, I would say, the LGBTQ community. I'm pretty sure I know they didn't call it that back then, but they would just say the gay community. And Annie K takes a much different route because she kind of left home with a shot in the dark. She kind of goes through her life that way, as a shot in the dark. She gets a job working at a bar. She's good friends with Baby Doll, even though Baby Doll and her at first were fighting over Clyde. Not even really fighting over Clyde. Annie thought Clyde was her boyfriend, but Clyde was really with Baby Doll. And Bobo is Clyde's cousin, and that's who she takes up with, and she learns from Lula Bell, like, he's a good guy. But the constant looking for her mama really puts a strain on their relationship, because she meets these guys who knew her mama. They tell her mama had died, and so for a while you could tell that she kind of accepted that and tried to move on with her life, but then she finds out it was a lie. And then she gets the address to where her mama really is. And what's so devastating is that she goes to meet her mother, and another little girl answers the door. and she's asking the girl about her mama and everything. She's asking about Hattie Lee, that's her mama's name. And the little girl said, what are you asking about my mama for? And the way that she's speaking of Hattie Lee, saying my mama, it's a way of endearance. Like, she has this woman and has her as her mama, and Annie K didn't. And what was the knife in the gut was that this little girl's name was Annie K. Like, her mama went and had another daughter and named her exactly, gave her the same exact name as the first daughter that she left behind with her mama. And that was even more hurtful for Annie, because it it just drove home that she didn't have a mama because she lost her mama like Vernice. She doesn't have a mama because her mama didn't choose her. Her mama gave her away. And it almost, it makes you think what was the, I would say, the origin story of Annie. How did she get here? Was she here through a tumultuous relationship? Was she here through an assault? And granted, her mama had her when she was young, I want to say a teenager, but she ended up giving Annie away. And this just kind of follows with Annie through the decisions that she makes. And it's a spoiler, but it was hard. At the end, Annie, because she's going through trying to find her place, like really trying to find her, really trying to heal her mother wound. She ends up taking up this relationship with her boss, who is this older man. And it's almost as if Annie is looking for love in any way, any validation. Even Bobo, he ends up breaking up with her, and he gets with a girl that's more so like Joette. Like, she comes from a good family, she's educated, he gets to go to school. That's his way of moving up in the world. And Annie is like, well, what does she look like? Who is she? Like, she just can't, she's always looking for a validation and a love, I think, to just feel her mother wound. And she gets into this relationship that's really not even a relationship, it's just like a situationship, because the man is married. And she becomes pregnant. And it's so interesting that Annie now, who struggled with finding her mama and having this mother wound, that now she's pregnant, and she's pregnant for this man that she doesn't want to be with and can't be with her. Now she doesn't want this child, because she see this child as like a reminder of something bad. And so she reaches out to Vernice. And keep in mind, during this time, her and Vernice have separated, because she left for Memphis, Vernice went to Atlanta. And I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since they've seen each other, but they're still writing, and Annie is a part of Vernice's wedding. And as Vernice is getting closer to Mrs. McHenry is starting to drop hints that her and Annie are not going to always be together. They're going different paths in life. And she said, the way you feel about Annie is the way that she used to feel about her little sister. But her little sister took a different path. She didn't go to school, she didn't do these things. And as she kept trying to hold on to her, it, I guess, caused strain on a relationship. But Vernice is dead set on holding on to Annie, because they call each other cradle friends, because they've been friends since they were infants. They were literally raised together in this small town. And the fact that they were both motherless little girls brought them even closer. But Annie wants to get an abortion, and she tries to get an abortion through the connections that Vernice has. And it's squandered at first, because be mindful that Vernice's family that she's marrying into, they're lawyers, and these people are looking for any opportunity to come after this black well-to-do family. This is during like the 50s and the 60s. So Vernice finally finds a way for her to get the abortion. Well, Annie really does. She goes back to Lulabelle in Mississippi. Mind you, Lulabelle said, don't ever come back, because if you come back, then that's not good. And what was so interesting was that when they were at Lulabelle's whorehouse the first time, when they first met her, because the car broke down and they had to work their way to earn, getting the car fixed and everything, her and Baby Doll were washing sheets. And there was another girl who had had an abortion. She was pregnant, and she was working as a prostitute. And they were saying all of the blood that was on the sheet, that couldn't have just been the abortion. They don't think that she actually made it. So Annie, fast forward, Annie goes back there, and mind you, Lula Bell is telling her she's not supposed to be back here and everything. So before she goes, Vernice sends her, kind of sends her off to go do it. She sends her money, gives her well wishes, and she puts dirt in Annie's bag as a way to make sure that Annie comes back to her. And so Annie goes through with the procedure down in Mississippi. And she said, they had to pay this white doctor because during this time, white doctors are not helping black people like that. So she goes and she does it, and she's making her way back to Atlanta with baby doll in a car. And Annie is kind of sounding a little delirious because they called Vernice to let her know that the procedure was done. And Lula Bell's like, I gave her some medicine, so she should be fine on the way back. They're on their way back to you. So Annie comes back to Vernice, and Vernice puts her in one of the guest rooms for her to sleep. So she came back to Annie with the dirt in her pocket. That was her way of bringing the dirt back. But when Vernice wakes up the next day, she finds Annie is dead. Annie died from the abortion because it caused internal bleeding. And we see how she's trying to get Annie buried. And because of how Annie died, it's like this scandal around it. And Joette's family is in the mortuary business. And because other people don't want to touch this scandal, she has to pretty much like reconcile with Joette. And Joette wants her to tell Franklin, her husband, the truth about what happened between them. And she ends up doing it even though she doesn't want to, where she has to just recognize and come to the realization that her feelings for Joette are very real. And not so much that she doesn't love Franklin. She loves Franklin, and she also loves Joette. But she also feels the need to perform in this way. And another thing that was really crucial to the story was that at the end, Annie had 3/4 to her name that she wanted Vernice to hold on to. And Vernice was like, I'll give you this money, Joette. Because Joette was like, I don't want no money from you, because if you pay me, it's money that's coming from your husband. And she's like, I'll give you these 3/4. And it was the quarters that she got from Annie, and Annie told her to not give it away, because we learned that Annie, while she was working at the bar when she was still alive, her mama, her real mama, Hattie Lee, had came to the bar to see her because she had saw her through the window when Annie had came to the house. And so she tells Annie, don't go stop, don't go looking for her anymore. It's not, she just pretty much let her go. And she bought a drink, and the change that was left over was the 75 cents from the dollar that her mama spent. And that was her way of holding on to the only thing that she had of her mama. And it was a beautiful story because it really teaches about sisterhood, friendship, how you choose your family in ways, and truly the power of having a mother. And when you don't have a mother, how powerful that loss can impact you. And it follows you like you have your mother wound. And there's so many women and men, just people period, who are showing up in the world and they have a mother wound, and it will never go away. And they were saying how, yeah, they were both fatherless, but to not have a mama, it just hurts differently. It cuts differently to not have the person who you come from. You were in their body, growing under their heart. And it was a beautiful story. It was touching, and it did bring some tears, but I absolutely loved Ken. It's a brand new book. It came out this year. So I know I gave some spoilers, but if you enjoy reading the book, let me know in the comments. Or if you haven't read the book, or if you're looking into it, or if you have, what were your feedback about the book? But I absolutely loved it, and the story that it told of sisterhood, and especially sisterhood amongst Black women.